The Millionaire's children cried every night, and no nanny could bear to stay in that house. Between childish screams and silent walls, the pain of grief lingered without a name, without a voice, without an embrace. But it only took an ordinary woman to walk in, look into the children's eyes, and say what no one else dared to say. The one crying there was also the father, and what once seemed like a curse became a miracle when someone finally had the courage to stay where everyone else had fled. The Aldridge mansion, imposing and majestic high in the Blue Ridge Mountains in Asheville, North Carolina, was known to everyone in the region. What no one knew was that behind those stone walls, the cries of two babies echoed every night like a lament that seemed to have no end. Raphael Aldridge, owner of one of the country's largest construction companies, walked through the spacious corridors of that grand house at 3 in the morning. His eyes, marked by deep dark circles, stared at the starry sky through the window, while the screams of Michael and Milo, his 6-month-old twin sons, reverberated as if they wanted to break through the walls. "Dr. Aldridge, I've tried everything. They just won't stop," said Teresa, the 11th nanny in less than 8 months, her voice trembling from exhaustion. "It's as if they're looking for someone." Raphael merely nodded, too drained to respond. Since Beatrice's passing during the twins' birth, nothing seemed to make sense anymore. The empire he had built, the ever-growing accounts, the projects that won international awards, none of it mattered when, at night, despair took over that house. "You need to rest," Teresa insisted, rocking Milo in her arms while Michael cried in his crib. "I can stay with them until dawn." "It's no use," Raphael replied, running his hands through his hair, now streaked with gray despite his 38 years. "No one can calm them. No one." Teresa lowered her eyes. She would not be the woman to solve that situation. She had already decided that the next morning she would hand in her resignation letter, just like all the others before her. "Doctor, don't get me wrong, but—" She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Have you thought about keeping some of Mrs. Beatrice's things nearby? Perhaps her scent, a photograph?" Raphael stiffened like a statue. His gaze, previously distant, became sharp. "Don't mention that name in this house. Ever again." Teresa swallowed hard. She knew she had crossed an invisible but indelible line. She mumbled an apology and returned her attention to the baby, who continued to cry inconsolably. The next morning, as expected, Teresa's resignation letter lay on the dining table, along with all her financial matters settled. She had left even before breakfast, taking with her stories about the mansion that frightened even the most skeptical. "They say you can hear footsteps in the hallway at night," commented one of the kitchen maids, "and that the children always look at the same spot, as if they see someone no one else does." "Nonsense," replied Mrs. Carmen, the longest-serving housekeeper, but who never ventured upstairs to the bedrooms after sunset. "It's just sadness. That house hasn't had joy since—" The phone rang, interrupting the conversation. It was from Raphael's office. Another cancelled meeting. Another day when the great businessman would be unable to keep his schedule due to exhaustion. Late that afternoon, Lucy, Raphael's sister, arrived unannounced, as she always did when she wanted to check if her brother was still functioning, as she put it. She walked through the well-maintained but lifeless garden and entered the mansion carrying bags from expensive stores and a look of concern. "You look terrible," was the first thing she said upon finding Raphael in his office, surrounded by papers and with an unshaven beard. "And those dark circles. You look like a zombie." "Good to see you too, Lucy," he replied without looking up from his documents. "Did you come to check if I'm still alive?" "I came because I care, and because I'm tired of hearing about nannies fleeing here as if the house were on fire." She placed her bags on the sofa and crossed her arms. "The last one said she had nightmares for a week after spending 2 nights here." Raphael finally looked up. "What do you want me to do? Sell the house? Send the boys to boarding school? They're 6 months old. I want you to react." Lucy raised her voice, then took a deep breath, trying to control herself. "Look, I brought you the contact for a new agency. They have professionals specializing in complex cases. Like my children who won't stop crying and scare away anyone who tries to care for them." Raphael's sarcasm was as sharp as a razor. "Exactly," Lucy was not intimidated. "We've scheduled interviews for tomorrow. 3 candidates. And you're going to be there even if I have to drag you." Raphael knew it was useless to argue with his sister. Since they were little, She always found a way to make him give in. He agreed, just for peace. The next day arrived with a fog typical of Asheville mornings, enveloping the mansion in an almost mystical aura. The first two candidates were exactly what Raphael expected: middle-aged women, uniformed, with impeccable resumes and international references. Both spoke about modern baby sleep techniques, balanced nutrition, and cognitive stimulation. They seemed more like programmed robots than people willing to love his children. It was when the third candidate entered that something seemed to change in the air of the mansion. Joanna Rivers did not wear a uniform, nor did she carry a resume printed on expensive paper. She wore jeans, a simple blouse, and her curly hair was tied back in an unpretentious bun. Her deep brown eyes scanned the room with a calm that seemed out of place in that house of nightly screams. "Do you have experience with twins?" Lucy asked, clearly uncomfortable with the woman's simple appearance. "I have experience with children," Joanna replied, her voice sounding like water gently flowing over stones. "And with pain." Raphael, who until then had seemed uninterested in the interviews, looked up. There was something in the way that woman spoke, direct, without frills, but with a strange compassion, that captured his attention. "May I see the children?" Joanna asked, without waiting for a positive response. The other candidates presented their qualifications first. Lucy tried to regain control of the situation. "I prefer to meet those I will care for before talking about myself," Joanna replied firmly. "If you don't mind." Raphael stood up, surprising his sister. "Come with me," he said, leading Joanna upstairs. Lucy followed them, visibly annoyed. Upon entering the room decorated in shades of blue and white, they found the twins awake, but silent, something rare. The temporary nanny watching them seemed relieved to see she would be replaced. Joanna approached the cribs slowly. She didn't speak in a childish voice, didn't make funny faces. She simply observed the two babies with an intensity that seemed to penetrate beyond what the eyes could see. Michael and Milo, as if sensing something different, fixed their eyes on her. And then, both looked at the same spot on the wall, that spot that so many nannies had commented on, that empty place that seemed to exert a strange fascination over the children. "They're not looking at the wall," Joanna said, almost in a whisper. "They're looking beyond it." Raphael felt a shiver run down his spine. That woman had just put into words something he himself felt, but had never admitted. "What do you mean?" Lucy asked in a defensive tone. "They're looking for someone," Joanna replied, turning to face Raphael. "And you know exactly who it is." That same night, against all of Lucy's expectations, Joanna Rivers began working at the Aldridge mansion. There was no negotiation of salary, benefits, or days off. Raphael simply asked when she could start, and the answer was direct: now. Lucy left the mansion annoyed, muttering to her brother that he was making a mistake. "She has no reliable references, Raphael. We barely know where she came from." "She was the only one who didn't show fear," he replied, with a certainty he hadn't felt in months. "And the boys. You saw how they reacted to her." Indeed, during the few minutes Joanna was in the twins' room, something unprecedented happened. Michael, the one who cried most intensely, calmed down under her gaze. He didn't fall asleep, but he stopped screaming, a small miracle in that house of despair. While Mrs. Carmen prepared Joanna's room, the new nanny remained with the children. She didn't sing, didn't rock the cribs, didn't offer toys. She just sat in a chair between the two and remained silent, observing them with that penetrating, calm gaze. "Do you need anything, ma'am?" Mrs. Carmen asked, finding the quietness strange. "A photo album," Joanna replied, "of the babies with their mother, if there is one." The housekeeper's expression changed instantly. "We don't have that here," she said, lowering her voice. "Dr. Aldridge. He doesn't allow it." "I understand," Joanna nodded without insisting. "And her room. Where is it?" Mrs. Carmen swallowed hard, looking around as if the walls could hear. "It was sealed. No one has entered there since she left." Joanna thanked her with a gesture and returned her attention to the babies, who watched her with that peculiar curiosity of newborns. The housekeeper left the room with the strange feeling that something had changed in the air of that house. When night fell, Raphael prepared for another sleepless night of screams. He locked himself in his downstairs office, as far as possible from his children's room, and tried to concentrate on financial reports that no longer made sense given his chronic fatigue. To his surprise, the silence persisted. He looked at the clock, 10 p.m. Usually, by this time, the first crying cycle would have begun. Another 30 minutes passed. Nothing. He checked the room monitor, thinking the device might be faulty. But no, he could see the babies, and they seemed peaceful, with Joanna sitting between the cribs just observing. At midnight, unable to bear the curiosity any longer, he cautiously went upstairs. As he approached the room, he heard something that made him freeze, a soft voice reciting what sounded like a story. And then the sun said to the moon, "Do not be afraid of the darkness, for it is there that your stars shine brightest." Raphael recognized those words. It was a story Beatrice used to invent, a fable about the sun and the moon that she swore she had never read anywhere. How could this unknown woman know? He pushed the door open slowly. Joanna was exactly as he had seen her on the monitor, sitting between the cribs. But now he could see her face illuminated by the bedside lamp, serene, attentive, with an expression that blended firmness and tenderness. "They've been asleep for almost an hour," she said, without turning to the door. Raphael entered the room incredulous. Michael and Milo, his sons who seemed programmed to turn nights into nightmares, were sleeping soundly. "How did you do this?" he asked, keeping his voice low. "It wasn't me," Joanna replied, slowly standing up. They decided to rest. "And that story, about the sun and the moon, where did you hear it?" Joanna's eyes met his with a disconcerting intensity. "Some stories live in the air, Dr. Aldridge. You just have to know how to listen to them." There was a moment of silence between them, not the oppressive silence that had dominated the house for months, but something different, like a breathing pause before a confession. "You need to rest too," she continued, walking towards the door. "Tomorrow will be another day." Raphael nodded, not knowing exactly how to react to this woman who seemed to read his thoughts. He returned to his room and, for the first time in a long time, slept without interruptions. The next morning, as he went down for coffee, he found an unusual scene. Joanna was in the kitchen, with the twins in a double stroller, talking to the maids who seemed fascinated by her. There was a different atmosphere in the air, something that recalled the times when that house was a home, not just a structure of stone and sorrow. "Good morning." "Dr. Aldridge," Joanna greeted naturally. "The boys have already had their first bottle. And we're getting to know the house." He noticed how calm the babies seemed, observing everything around them with curiosity. Instead of the constant crying that was the soundtrack of their lives, "Are they okay?" he asked, approaching cautiously. "They're discovering the world," Joanna replied. "Children need routine, but also novelty. Colors, sounds, movement." "I've never seen them like this," Raphael confessed, watching Michael play with a colorful teether, something he had always rejected before. "You rarely see them, don't you?" Joanna's question did not sound like an accusation, but an observation. Raphael looked away, not answering. It was true. Since the birth of his children, he had maintained a physical and emotional distance, as if every glance at those small faces was a stab of memory. "I'll take them to the garden later," Joanna continued, without waiting for a response. "I don't think they've ever felt the sun on their skin or seen the trees up close. The garden is abandoned," Raphael murmured, remembering how Beatrice loved to care for the flowers, especially the hydrangeas she had planted all around the house. "Then we'll see the abandoned garden." Joanna's firmness was unquestionable. "Sometimes it's in abandonment that we find what needs to be cared for." That phrase hit Raphael like a precise blow. He mumbled some excuse and left for work, disturbed by the way that woman seemed to see beyond appearances. During the day, as he tried to concentrate on meetings and conferences, his mind kept returning home. For the first time in almost a year, he felt curious about what was happening there, about how his children were. He returned earlier than usual and, as he parked the car at the mansion's entrance, he heard something that had long been absent from that place: laughter. He followed the sound to the backyard garden and found Joanna sitting on a blanket spread on the grass, with the twins lying in front of her, laughing as she swung an improvised mobile made of branches and leaves. "Look who's here," she said to the babies, pointing to Raphael. "It's your daddy." That word, daddy, sounded strange to Raphael's ears. It was a title he had never felt was his, a role he didn't know how to play. "May I join you?" he asked with an almost childlike hesitation. Of course, Joanna replied, moving aside to make room for him on the blanket. Michael discovered his feet today, and Milo is fascinated by the leaves on the trees. Small great discoveries. Raphael sat down awkwardly, not knowing how to act. He realized he barely knew his own children, their preferences, their gestures, their developing personalities. I don't know how to do this, he confessed, feeling vulnerable in a way he hadn't experienced in years. No one knows at first. Joanna's voice was gentle, but not condescending. It's a dance you learn little by little, with many wrong steps along the way. Milo, as if sensing his father's tension, began to whimper. Raphael froze, expecting the explosion of screams that usually followed. Pick him up, Joanna suggested. Never is the perfect time to start. She picked up Milo and handed him to Raphael. Support his head carefully. That's it. Now let him feel that you are firm, that he is safe. With hesitant movements, Raphael cradled his son in his arms. The little one looked at him with eyes identical to Beatrice's, large, expressive, and almost golden brown. For an instant he felt panic rise, the pain of loss threatening to engulf him again. Breathe, Joanna's voice brought him back. Just breathe and be here now. Milo surprisingly stopped crying. His curious gaze fixed on his father's face, as if studying him, trying to recognize him. He knows who you are, Joanna said with a soft smile. They always have. Raphael felt something break inside him, not like a painful rupture, but like the melting of long-frozen ice. Something warm and long-forgotten began to flow again in his chest. That night, for the first time, Raphael dined at the kitchen table, with the babies in high chairs beside him, while Joanna prepared the baby food she had introduced into their diet. There were no grand conversations, just the clinking of cutlery, the occasional babbling of the twins, and that strange sense of normalcy that had been missing from that house for so long. When the children were almost asleep, after their bath, Raphael asked to join Joanna in the ritual of putting them to bed. He watched, fascinated, as she rocked them with sure movements, whispering words of comfort. "Do you have children?" he asked as they went downstairs after putting the twins in their cribs. Joanna paused for a moment before answering, "No, I don't." "It seems so natural for you to care for them." "Perhaps because I understand their pain," she replied, her eyes fixed on a distant point. "And yours too, Dr. Aldridge." He frowned, disconcerted. "How could you understand?" "I lost my mother when I was born," Joanna replied as she sat in the living room armchair, "and I grew up watching my father waste away in silence, blaming my brother for her absence." Raphael remained standing, surprised by the sudden confession. Something in the way Joanna spoke, direct without self-pity, prevented him from looking away. "For years I hated my younger brother," she continued, with a disturbing tranquility. "I thought that if he hadn't been born, my mother would still be alive. If it hadn't been a complicated birth." "How did you overcome that?" Raphael asked, finally sitting on the sofa opposite her. "By understanding that it wasn't his fault. Nor mine, nor anyone's." Joanna leaned slightly forward. "Pain needs to be felt, Dr. Aldridge, not locked away in a closed room." Those words hit him like a slap. That was exactly what he had done. He had locked away the pain, the memories, Beatrice entirely in a room no one could access. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said, standing up abruptly. "You didn't know Beatrice. You don't know what we lost." "No, I don't know her," Joanna agreed, unintimidated. "But your children won't know her either, if you keep erasing her from this house." Raphael felt anger rise in his chest like a wave. "Who do you think you are to tell me how to raise my children? To invade my house and judge my pain?" "Someone who sees what you refuse to see," she replied, still maintaining that disconcerting calm. "That your children are suffering as much as you are. That they feel her absence, even without understanding it. That this place is sick, not because of ghosts, but because of unlived memories." A heavy silence settled between them. Raphael felt exposed, as if that woman could read between the lines of his gestures all the guilt he carried. "Tomorrow you will receive your payment and leave," he finally said, his voice controlled. "I don't need someone who thinks they have the right to analyze my life." Joanna stood up, showing no surprise or annoyance. "As you wish. But before I go, I'd like to leave something for the boys." "What?" "A letter. For when they are older." Raphael shrugged, too exhausted to argue. Do as you wish." When he went up to his room that night, Raphael felt his chest heavy with a mix of anger and guilt. Part of him knew that Joanna was right, that there was something profoundly wrong with the way he had dealt with Beatrice's loss. But admitting it would be like tearing open a wound he had carefully kept closed, even if infected. He lay down expecting another sleepless night. To his surprise, the babies didn't cry. The silence, once so longed for, now seemed almost accusatory. In the early hours of the morning, he woke with a start. He had dreamed of the closed room. In the dream, he stood before the door and could hear Beatrice's voice from the other side calling to him. When he finally managed to open the door, the room was empty, but on the bed lay hundreds of scattered letters. He sat up in bed, his heart pounding. This wasn't the first time he had dreamed of the locked room, but never so vividly. He checked the clock. 3:17 a.m. Driven by something he couldn't explain, he got up and walked down the dark hallway to the baby's room. He needed to check if they were okay, if the silence wasn't a bad omen. As he approached the half-open door, he heard that soft voice again telling stories. He peeked through the crack and saw Joanna with Michael in her arms, gently rocking him, while Milo slept soundly in his crib. "Your mother loved the sea, you know," she said in an almost confidential tone. "She used to say that the vastness of the water made her feel small, and at the same time part of something immense. One day, when you're older, your father will take you to see the ocean, and you'll understand how she felt." Raphael felt his breath catch. How did that woman know about Beatrice's passion for the sea? How did she know such intimate details about someone she had never met? He retreated silently, his mind swirling with questions. He returned to his room and spent the rest of the night awake, turning over possibilities. Who, after all, was Joanna Rivers? How did she know so much about his family? Could she be some distant acquaintance of Beatrice, someone his wife had mentioned and he didn't remember? When the sun began to rise, painting the room with a golden light, Raphael made a decision. He wouldn't send Joanna away, at least not until he found out who she really was and what she wanted. He went down for coffee and found her in the kitchen, preparing bottles with the efficiency of someone who had been doing it for years. "You're not leaving today," he said, without preamble. Joanna turned to him, showing no surprise. "I know. How could you know?" "I just decided that. Because the boys still need me," she replied simply, "and so do you." There was something in that statement that completely disarmed Raphael. It wasn't arrogance, but a serene observation, like someone watching the rain from a window. "I want to know who you are," he insisted. "How you know so many details about Beatrice, about us. Who told you about her?" "No one told me." Joanna placed the bottles on a tray. "Some things you just feel. Like your children, who feel her presence even without having known her." "That's ridiculous," Raphael shook his head. "You investigated my life, I don't know for what purpose. Maybe Lucy is right. Maybe you're some kind of opportunist." Joanna smiled, a sad smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You have every right to be suspicious. But if I wanted to take advantage, don't you think I would have come up with a better story? Brought documents, photos, something to prove a connection with your wife?" It was true. She hadn't tried to establish any formal link, hadn't asked for anything beyond the agreed salary. "I'm going to take care of the boys now," she continued, picking up the tray. "When you're ready, come and truly get to know your children. They've been waiting for you for a long time." When Raphael returned from the office that afternoon, he found Lucy waiting for him in the living room, her face heavy with concern. "I came as soon as I heard you kept that woman in the house," she said without greeting him. "Have you completely lost your mind?" "Lucy, don't start—" "No, you're going to listen to me," she interrupted, standing up. "I had her investigated. Do you know what we found?" "Nothing, literally nothing. It's as if she appeared out of thin air. No records in agencies, no professional history with children." Raphael felt a chill run down his spine. There must be something. Everyone has a past. "Exactly!" Lucy exclaimed, exasperated. "She's not who she says she is. And you left this stranger taking care of your children." At that moment, Joanna appeared at the living room door with the twins in their stroller. "Excuse me for interrupting. We were going to the garden to enjoy the late afternoon." Lucy spun on her heels, glaring at her with hostility. "Who are you, anyway? Where did you come from? How did you know about this family?" "Lucy, please. Raphael tried to intervene, embarrassed by his sister's direct approach. "It's all right," Joanna said calmly. "These are valid questions. I came from Charleston, South Carolina, Mrs. Lucy. I've worked informally my whole life, caring for children in the community where I grew up. I don't have certificates or references from important families. I heard about the vacancy because my cousin works at the laundry service that serves Dr. Aldridge's house." It was a simple, direct explanation. But something told Raphael it wasn't the whole truth. "And the story about your brother? About your mother?" he questioned. "All true," Joanna replied, holding his gaze. "Just as it's true that your children need to know the mother they had, even if through borrowed memories." Lucy looked from one to the other, confused. "What is she talking about, Raphael?" He hesitated. He wasn't ready to explain to his sister what had been happening in that house, the nightly conversations, the inexplicable details Joanna knew about Beatrice, how the babies had changed in such a short time. "Let's go to the garden," he said to the twins, ignoring his sister's question. To his own surprise, he approached the stroller and pushed it towards the door, leaving Lucy speechless and Joanna with a small smile of approval. In the garden, while the babies played on a blanket spread on the grass, Raphael confronted Joanna again. "My sister is right to be suspicious," he said. "You appeared out of nowhere. You know things you shouldn't know, and you act as if you have some mission here." Joanna watched the children with that characteristic attention, as if their every movement was a text to be deciphered. "Everyone has a mission, Dr. Aldridge," she finally replied. "Mine is to help these children find peace. And you too, if you allow it. Why? Why do you care about us?" She turned to face him, with those eyes that seemed to see beyond the surface. "Because I know the pain of growing up in a house where grief took the place of love. Because I know what it's like to be blamed for an absence you didn't cause." Raphael felt his chest tighten. It was as if that woman could translate into words the feelings he himself couldn't name. "I loved Beatrice so much," he confessed, his voice choked. It was the first time he had said her name aloud since the tragedy. She was everything. And then suddenly she was gone. And she left 2 pieces of herself to remind me every day of what I lost. "They are not just memories, Dr. Aldridge." Joanna's voice was gentle but firm. "They are present. They are future. They are life that continues despite everything." Michael began to babble, stretching out his little arms as if he wanted to be picked up. Raphael instinctively approached and lifted him, surprised by the naturalness of the gesture. "How do you tell them apart?" he asked, observing how his son settled into his arms without the usual crying. "They're so identical." "Not to those who truly look," Joanna replied. "Michael has a small mark on his right earlobe. Milo has more almond-shaped eyes. Michael is more restless, likes movement. Milo observes more, prefers sounds to colors." Raphael realized with a pang of shame that he had never noticed these details about his own children. He had always seen them as a unit, the twins, never as individuals with their own characteristics. "They will need you to know them," Joanna continued, as if reading his thoughts. "To know who is who, even in the dark. To understand their fears, their joys, their personalities." "I don't know if I can," Raphael admitted, feeling suddenly vulnerable. "I don't know if I have that capacity." "You do," she affirmed, with a conviction that surprised him. "You just need to unearth what you buried along with her memories." At that moment, as if understanding the gravity of the conversation, Michael rested his small hand on his father's face, an innocent touch that brought a whirlwind of emotions to Raphael. It was the first truly affectionate gesture he had received from one of his children. "I'll leave you alone for a bit," Joanna said, standing up. "You have a lot to talk about." As she walked away towards the house, Raphael sat on the grass with Michael in his lap and Milo crawling beside him. For the first time since they were born, he allowed himself to truly look at his children, not as painful memories of Beatrice, but as developing individuals with their own stories to write. Something began to change within him, like a small dam that, after resisting the water's pressure for so long, finally showed its first cracks. That night, when the babies were already asleep, Raphael found a small package on his bed. Inside, there was a children's storybook whose cover showed the sun and moon embracing among stars. There was no card or inscription, but he knew it came from Joanna. He opened it carefully and on the first page found a handwritten dedication to Michael and Milo, May the stars light your paths, even on the darkest nights. With love, Mommy. Raphael immediately recognized Beatrice's handwriting. Raphael held the book in his trembling hands, feeling the world spin around him. That handwriting, the soft curves in the M's, the dot of the I always slightly off to the right, was unmistakably Beatrice's. How had that book gotten there? How could Joanna have access to something so intimate, so personal? With a pounding heart, he went downstairs in search of answers. He found Joanna in the kitchen, preparing what looked like tea. "What does this mean?" he asked, holding the book open to the dedication page. "How did you get this? Where did you find it?" Joanna looked at the book calmly, and then directly into his eyes. It was in the boys' room on the second shelf of the bookcase, behind some toys that had never been opened. "Impossible," Raphael shook his head. "I myself emptied that room after she left. I didn't leave anything that reminded me of her." "Are you sure?" Joanna asked. "Or perhaps deep down you wanted to preserve something of hers for your children, even without admitting it to yourself?" Raphael tried to retort, but something stopped him. Had he really checked every corner of that room? Or had his haste to erase painful memories made him overlook details? Was it possible that unconsciously he had allowed some objects to remain? "Who are you?" he asked again, now in a lower voice, almost a whisper. "Why are you doing this to us?" "I'm doing nothing but caring for two children who need love," Joanna replied with her usual calm, "and for a man who got lost in his own pain." Raphael sat heavily in one of the kitchen chairs, the book still in his hands. "This book, it was her favorite. We bought it together when we found out they were twins. She used to say she wanted them to grow up knowing that even in darkness, there is always light." "And there is," Joanna affirmed, sitting opposite him. "But it takes courage to see it." A silent tear rolled down Raphael's face, the first he had allowed himself since the funeral. "I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to move on." "No one does." Joanna reached out and lightly touched the book. "That's why we need each other, to find the way together." There was a moment of silence between them, as if an invisible pact was being sealed. Raphael realized that for the first time in almost a year, he was actually talking about Beatrice, not just trying to erase her from his memory. "The boys will wake up early tomorrow," Joanna said, standing up. "You should try to rest." Raphael nodded but didn't move. He had the feeling that if he left that kitchen, something important would be left behind. An unmade confession, an unanswered question. "Thank you," he finally said, "for taking care of them, for not giving up." Joanna smiled, a genuine smile that lit up her eyes. "They are special children. They deserve someone who believes in them, who truly sees them." In the weeks that followed, a new routine established itself in the Aldridge mansion. Raphael gradually became more involved in his children's lives. He was present at bath time, read stories before bed, always from the book he had found, and learned to identify their needs. The babies responded to this approach in a surprising way. Crying episodes decreased dramatically, giving way to laughter and babbling. Michael especially seemed to flourish under his father's attention, always reaching out his arms when he saw him enter the room. Joanna observed this transformation with a serene gaze, like someone watching the natural ripening of a carefully planted seed. Little by little, she taught Raphael how to care for his children, not with rigid instructions, but with simple gestures, silent demonstrations of how to meet their needs. One Sunday morning, while Raphael was playing with the boys in the living room, something unthinkable weeks before, Joanna approached with a wooden box in her hands. "I found it in the attic," she said. "It seems important." Raphael immediately recognized the box. It was where Beatrice kept her most precious memories: movie tickets, birthday cards, small travel souvenirs. "You shouldn't have gone in there," he said, his voice tense. "Those things aren't for the boys," Joanna completed. "But it is exactly for them that these memories should be preserved." Raphael took the box carefully, as if holding something extremely fragile. How long had it been since he last saw it? He vaguely remembered putting it in the attic with other things of Beatrice's. On a day when the pain was particularly unbearable. "I don't know if I'm ready," he confessed, without opening it. "You don't have to do it now," Joanna replied. "But when you are ready, they will want to know their mother through their father's eyes. Through the stories only you can tell. That afternoon when the babies were sleeping, Raphael finally gathered the courage to open the box. Inside he found a kaleidoscope of memories, photos from their honeymoon in Maui, Hawaii, birthday cards with handwritten declarations of love, a small pouch of seashells Beatrice had collected on her last beach trip, before discovering her pregnancy. At the bottom of the box, a sealed envelope caught his attention. It had his name written in her unmistakable handwriting. With trembling hands, he opened it. It was a letter dated the day before the birth. My love, if you are reading this, it means my greatest fear has come true. I know the doctors say everything will be fine, but something inside me, an intuition I can't explain, tells me to prepare. I want you to know that these 9 months carrying our children have been the fullest of my life. I feel that somehow I already know them, their kicks, their moments of agitation and calm, the positions they prefer. Michael, yes, I'm sure it's him, always moves when I play the piano. Milo gets agitated when you speak, as if he recognizes his father's voice even before he is born. If I'm not there to see them grow up, promise me a few things. Don't deprive them of me. Tell stories, show photos, talk about who I was. Don't hide in pain. They will need a present, strong father, capable of loving for both of us. Let light and music into our home. They were conceived with love and music. They need to grow up that way too. And Raphael, my love, don't blame yourself. Don't blame our children. Life is a mystery we don't always understand, but it always carries purposes greater than we can see. If I can, somehow, I will continue to watch over the 3 of you. Believe that, with all my love forever, Beatrice. Raphael didn't notice when he started to cry. Silent tears streamed down his face as Beatrice's words echoed in his mind, not as a lament from the past, but as a guide for the future. He heard soft footsteps and looked up. Joanna stood at the door, watching him with an expression that mingled respect and understanding. She knew, Raphael said, his voice choked. Somehow she knew what would happen. Some souls are like that, Joanna replied, approaching slowly. They see beyond what the eyes can perceive. I broke every promise I made to her, he continued, holding the letter against his chest. I deprived my children of her. I hid in pain. I turned our house into a mausoleum. There's still time, Joanna sat beside him. They are so small. Their whole lives ahead. Raphael stared at her with a question he couldn't formulate hanging between them. How had this woman, who came from nowhere, managed in a few weeks to melt the ice that had encapsulated his heart for so long? Her room, he finally said. Her room. It's been locked since that day. I know, Joanna replied with a slight nod. The children look at that door every night. Raphael frowned, surprised. What do you mean? When they cry, when they are restless, that's where their gaze turns, as if they know something important is in there. An idea began to form in Raphael's mind, disturbing yet comforting. Do you think they feel her presence? Joanna smiled, that serene smile that seemed to carry ancient wisdom. I think there are connections that even distance cannot break. That night, after putting the boys to bed, Raphael watched them for a long time. He realized Joanna was right, even asleep. Their little faces were turned towards the wall separating their room from the closed room. Making a decision he had postponed for months, he walked to the end of the hallway, where a white door remained locked, untouched. With the key he had kept in his office drawer, he slowly turned the lock. The air inside the room was heavy, stagnant with time. The curtains closed, the bed made as Beatrice had left it that last morning, her slippers still beside the nightstand. A sanctuary frozen in time. Raphael entered hesitantly, as one treads on sacred ground. Her perfume, a mix of jasmine and vanilla, still subtly lingered in the air like an olfactory ghost. On the dressing table, he found her hairbrush with a few brown strands still caught in the bristles. The half-empty perfume bottle, a rosy lipstick used halfway. He opened the wardrobe and let his fingers run over the colorful fabrics. Beatrice had always preferred vibrant colors, saying life already had enough gray. At the back of the closet, a shoebox caught his attention. Upon opening it, he found dozens of small envelopes, all numbered, and with names written on them. For Michael, 1st birthday, for Milo, 10 years old, for my children, when they fall in love for the first time. They were letters, Letters Beatrice had written for the children who hadn't even been born yet, planning to be present in every important moment of their lives, even if only through words. Raphael felt his heart ache. His wife, always so provident, always thinking ahead, had left a part of herself for her children's future. And he, in his selfishness, in his blind grief, had almost deprived Michael and Milo of this precious legacy. He carefully collected the box and, as he turned to leave, noticed something he hadn't seen before, a notebook on the bedside table. Upon opening it, he discovered it was a pregnancy diary. Pages and pages where Beatrice had recorded every kick, every doctor's appointment, every dream she had for her children. In the last entry, dated the day before the birth, he read, "I feel that I won't be here to see them grow up, but I leave my love stored in every corner of this house, in every object, in every letter, in every memory we built together. Raphael will know how to find the way. He is stronger than he imagines." A tear fell on the page, slightly blurring the ink. Raphael carefully closed the diary and hugged it to his chest. At that moment, something changed within him, not like a sudden revelation, but like the natural maturation of a truth that was already germinating in his heart. Beatrice hadn't simply left. She had left parts of herself scattered everywhere, in the letters, in the diary, in the carefully stored objects, and above all in the eyes of her children, who carried the same golden sparkle as her gaze. He left the room with a different feeling, not of renewed grief, but of a strange peace. As if by opening that locked door, he had released not only Beatrice's memories, but also his own capacity to move forward. In the hallway, to his surprise, he found Joanna standing by the twins' bedroom door. There was something different in her expression, a mixture of relief and satisfaction, like someone witnessing an important mission being accomplished. "They're sleeping peacefully," she said with a slight smile. "No crying, no agitation." Raphael nodded, feeling a gratitude that words could not express. "Thank you," he said simply, "for everything." Joanna tilted her head as if understanding the weight of that gratitude. "It was nothing you couldn't have done yourself. You just needed to find the way." "How did you know?" he asked, finally giving voice to the question that had tormented him for weeks. "How did you know about the book? About the story of the sun and the moon, about the closed room?" Joanna's smile became enigmatic, almost mysterious. "Some people can hear what isn't said, Dr. Aldridge. They can feel what is hidden. I just listened to what this house was trying to tell." Before he could insist, one of the babies, Raphael recognized the cry as Michael's, began to stir. Joanna made to enter the room, but he stopped her with a gentle gesture. "I'll go," he said, with a newfound confidence in his voice. "I think I know what he needs." In the weeks that followed, the Aldridge mansion underwent a gradual transformation, as if the house itself breathed a sigh of relief. The room that had been closed for so long now remained open, with the windows allowing sunlight to bathe the previously gloomy space. Raphael had moved some of Beatrice's clothes, her perfumes and photographs to the boys' room, creating a small altar of memories where there had once been only absence. One afternoon, while the babies napped, Raphael found Joanna in the backyard garden, kneeling among abandoned flower beds, pulling out weeds with her hands protected by worn gloves. "What are you doing?" he asked, approaching. "Unearthing what was forgotten," she replied, without taking her eyes off her work. "There are hydrangeas down here, suffocated by the weeds, and lavenders further on, almost disappeared." Raphael looked around. The garden, once his pride, had turned into a tangle of shapeless, lifeless vegetation. How had he not noticed this before? "Beatrice loved this garden," he commented, kneeling beside Joanna. "She would spend hours here, talking to the plants as if they were people." Joanna smiled, carefully removing a creeper that was suffocating a small bush. "Some people believe that plants respond to our energy, to our words, that they feel when they are loved. Like children," Raphael completed thoughtfully. "Like people." "Exactly," she agreed, handing him one of the gloves. "Want to help? These hydrangeas need to breathe." Without hesitation, he accepted the glove and began to work alongside her. It was strange, this feeling of purpose in something as simple as clearing a garden. But somehow each weed removed seemed to carry with it a little of the weight he had carried for so long. "How did you learn about gardening?" he asked, curious about another of that woman's mysterious skills. "From my grandmother," Joanna replied, with a distant look of someone revisiting cherished memories. She used to say that gardens are like people. They need constant care but also freedom to grow in their own way. Raphael nodded, recognizing the simple wisdom of those words. Wasn't that exactly what he had tried to do with his children? Control everything, stifle natural growth, in a misguided attempt to protect them from pain? I think I understand now, he said, almost to himself, why the boys cried so much. Why nothing seemed to calm them. Joanna looked up, questioning. They were suffocated, he continued, pulling out a particularly stubborn weed with more vigor. Like these plants. They needed space to feel, to grow. And I tried to bury everything, including them. A comprehending silence settled between them, filled only by the sound of birds and the rustling of earth. It's never too late, Joanna finally said, straightening her back. Look, you can already see the first flowers peeking out. Indeed, among the disordered vegetation, small blue hydrangea buds began to appear, like timid promises of renewal. They made it a routine every afternoon. While the babies rested, they dedicated an hour to the garden. Raphael discovered an unexpected pleasure in that activity. There was something deeply therapeutic in tending the earth, in seeing concrete results of his work, in actively participating in the rebirth of something he had thought lost forever. The household staff watched, astonished, the change in their employer. The man who was once withdrawn, who barely spoke to anyone, now conversed during breakfast, smiled while holding his children, and came home earlier to participate in the baby's bath. It's a miracle, Mrs. Carman whispered to the other maids. That woman did what no one else could. Lucy, who remained suspicious of Joanna, also noticed her brother's transformation. On one of her visits, she found him in the garden, his hands dirty with soil and an expression of serenity she hadn't seen in a long time. I can't believe what I'm seeing, she commented, approaching with her high heels, sinking slightly into the damp earth. Raphael Aldridge doing manual labor? He laughed, a sound that seemed strange, almost forgotten. It's good to feel the earth, Lou. You should try it. Lucy grimaced, but there was a slight smile on her lips. I prefer my manicure intact, thank you. She looked around, assessing the visible transformation of the garden. But I have to admit, the place is coming back to life. Raphael stood up, wiping his hands on a cloth. It's not just the garden, he said with sudden seriousness. It's me too. I'm waking up somehow. Lucy studied her brother for a moment, her eyes moist. She would be happy to see you like this, she finally said, referring to Beatrice. It was the first time they had spoken openly about the deceased, without the weight of the taboo that had settled between them. Like a dam that finally finds a crack through which water can flow, they began to share memories, small stories, moments they had kept to themselves during that year of silent grief. Late in the afternoon, when Joanna appeared with the twins in their stroller for a walk in the newly restored garden, Lucy observed her with new eyes. Thank you, she said when they were alone for a moment. For my brother, for my nephews. Joanna smiled, that serene smile that seemed to be her trademark. I just showed the way. He always had the strength to walk it. Lucy tilted her head, studying the woman with renewed curiosity. Who are you, really? Just someone who understands pain, Joanna replied simply. Anne knows that it needs to be crossed, not avoided. Before Lucy could insist, the babies began to babble happily, as if calling for their attention. Michael stretched his little arms out to a blue butterfly that had landed near the stroller, while Milo watched, fascinated, the movement of the leaves in the wind. The scene was so peaceful, so normal that it was hard to believe that, just a few weeks earlier, those same children had spent entire nights in despair. Lucy felt tears in her eyes, not of sadness but of relief. Perhaps after all there was hope for that broken family. That night, after a quiet dinner where even Lucy had participated, Raphael sat on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the starry sky. He felt a peace he hadn't experienced for so long that he had almost forgotten what it was like. Joanna joined him, silent as ever, bringing her own cup. Thank you, he said, after a long, comfortable silence. For saving us. She shook her head slightly. You saved yourself, Dr. Aldridge. I was just here. That's not true, he turned to face her. You did something no one else could. You saw beyond appearances, beyond the defenses I built, how... Joanna looked at the sky, as if searching for words among the stars. Perhaps because I have been on the other side of pain, she finally replied. And I know it is possible to cross it. Raphael nodded, understanding the depth of those simple words. There was something about Joanna that had always intrigued him, a wisdom that seemed disproportionate to her apparent age, a capacity to see beyond that bordered on the supernatural. "My sister asked who you are," he commented with a half-smile. "I confess I sometimes wonder that myself." Joanna smiled without taking her eyes off the sky. "I'm just someone who was in the right place at the right time. Like that blue butterfly in the garden today. It appeared when we needed it, didn't it?" There was something enigmatic in that answer, something Raphael couldn't fully decipher, but somehow he felt he didn't need to understand everything. Some things perhaps were better left in their mystery. "The boys are growing so fast," he commented, changing the subject. "Yesterday I caught Michael trying to stand up, leaning on the crib." "Soon they'll take their first steps," Joanna agreed, "and say their first words. Do you know what scares me?" Raphael confessed with a sigh. "Thinking about all the things yet to come, school, adolescence, important decisions. How will I guide them alone? How will I know what to do?" "You won't be alone," she replied with quiet conviction. "You have your sister. You have friends who will return to your life when you allow it. And you have Beatrice's memories, which will always serve as a guide." Raphael reflected on those words. It was true. Since he had begun to open up again, old friends had reappeared. Colleagues showed genuine concern. Even neighbors he hadn't seen in months stopped to chat when they saw him walking with the babies. "And what about you?" he asked, feeling a sudden anxiety. "Will you stay with us?" There was a prolonged pause before Joanna replied, and when she did, her voice had a different tone, softer, almost melancholic. "Each person has their time in our lives. Dr. Aldridge, I arrive when necessary and leave when my presence is no longer essential." A shiver ran down Raphael's spine. There was something in that phrase that sounded like a farewell, like a gentle warning that nothing is permanent. "The boys need you," he said, with more intensity than he intended. "I need you." Joanna turned to him with that deep gaze that seemed to read his soul. "Do you really? Or do you just fear change, fear taking the next step alone?" Raphael didn't know how to answer. Indeed, the idea of continuing without Joanna's constant presence, without her silent wisdom, caused him a discomfort he couldn't name. "I have nowhere to go right now," she reassured him with a slight smile. "But one day, when you are ready, when the boys are secure in your love, my path will lead me onward." Those words hung between them like a promise and a premonition. Raphael realized that from the beginning, there had been something transient, almost ethereal about Joanna's presence in their lives, as if she had never intended to stay, only to pass through like a season that brings with it necessary changes and then follows its natural course. In the children's room, as he watched them sleep peacefully, Raphael noticed how much they had grown in those weeks. Not just physically, but in personality and presence. Michael, always more restless, slept with his little arms open as if wanting to embrace the world. Milo, contemplative since he was small, had his little hands closed near his face, in a position that resembled someone in deep reflection. Raphael gently stroked each of their heads, feeling a wave of love so intense it almost hurt. How could he have been so blind, so lost in his own pain that he couldn't see the beauty growing before his eyes? "I promise you," he whispered, his voice choked, "I promise you will know your mother through me, that you will grow up knowing how much you were loved always." Standing by the door, Joanna watched the scene with a discreet smile. She had largely fulfilled her mission there. The twins no longer cried at night. The house was breathing life again, and Raphael was finally beginning to move through his grief, instead of just carrying it as a burden. But there was still something to be concluded, one last bridge to be built before she could move on. And she knew exactly what was needed for that to happen. The next morning, while Raphael worked in his home office, a new habit he had adopted to be closer to his children, Joanna gently knocked on the door. "May I speak with you for a moment?" she asked with an envelope in her hands. Raphael nodded, indicating the chair in front of him. He noticed she looked different that morning, more solemn, like someone about to make an important revelation. "What is it?" he asked, feeling a slight apprehension. Joanna handed him the envelope. "Something I need you to read. Something that explains who I am." Raphael took the envelope with hesitant hands. It was simple, with no address or stamp, just his name written in a handwriting he didn't recognize. "What is this?" he asked, feeling a strange uneasiness. "My truth," Joanna replied with serenity, something that needed to wait for the right moment to be revealed. With a pounding heart, Raphael opened the envelope and pulled out a single folded sheet. As he unfolded it, his eyes were immediately drawn to the signature at the bottom, a name that made his entire body go cold: Beatrice Aldridge. He looked up at Joanna, confused, incredulous. "What kind of joke is this?" "It's not a joke," she replied, holding his gaze firmly. "Please read it." With trembling hands, Raphael turned his attention to the letter, written in that handwriting he knew so well, that he saw in his dreams. "My dearest Raphael, if this letter has reached your hands, it means Joanna has kept her promise, and that you are finally ready to hear what I need to say. Joanna Rivers is my second cousin, Aunt Cecilia's daughter, the one you always said was the family's mystic aunt, remember? We grew up together in Charleston, South Carolina until I was 12, when my parents moved to New York City. Even separated by distance, we maintained a connection that always defied explanation. We felt each other's pains, shared dreams, intuitions. When I found out I was pregnant with twins, I had a premonition I couldn't explain, a fear that went beyond the normal anxiety of a first-time expectant mother. I sought out Joanna, who always had this acute sensitivity to things we cannot see with our eyes. We talked at length, and she confirmed what I already suspected. There was a real risk I would not survive childbirth. "I didn't tell you this, how could I? You were already so worried, so anxious about the baby's arrival. There was nothing the doctors could do beyond what they were already doing. It was just an intuition, a premonition. But just in case, I made Joanna promise that if the worst happened, she would come to you. Not immediately. You would need to go through the initial grief alone. You would need to feel the pain in all its intensity. But when things started to get out of control, when our children desperately needed a bridge to the love I left for them, she would come. Joanna knows all the stories I invented to tell our children. She knows my favorite places, my songs, my quirks. Not because she investigated, but because we grew up sharing these things. She is the closest I could send of myself to care for you. I'm no longer physically there, my love, but I have left much of myself behind. In the letters for the boys, in the pregnancy diary, in the stories Joanna knows, and most importantly, in you, in your smile, in your heart, in your capacity to love that I know you will find again. Forgive yourself. Move forward. Let our children know joy, music, color, everything we always valued together, and know that in some way we don't understand, I continue to watch over you. With eternal love, Beatrice. Raphael let the letter fall onto the table, too stunned to speak. Silent tears streamed down his face as he tried to process that revelation that challenged everything he believed. "You were cousins?" he finally managed to ask, his voice choked. Joanna nodded, her eyes moist. "More than that. We were like sisters. We grew up together in Charleston, where my grandmother taught us about gardens, about listening to what isn't said, about seeing beyond." "Why didn't you tell me before? Why all this mystery?" "Because you weren't ready," she replied simply. "If I had arrived introducing myself as Beatrice's cousin, you would have rejected me immediately. You would have seen just another painful memory, another link to the past you were trying to forget." Raphael knew she was right. In the first months after Beatrice's loss, he had cut ties with everyone who reminded him of her, mutual friends, family, even colleagues who knew her. "I preferred you to know me as a stranger," Joanna continued. "Someone with no ties to your past, no expectations. Someone who could help you rebuild the present before reconnecting with the memories." Raphael wiped away his tears with the back of his hand, trying to organize his thoughts. Now so many things made sense. Joanna's knowledge of Beatrice's preferences, of the stories she invented, of the small details no one else could know. The previous nannies, and he began, with a sudden understanding. "They couldn't stay because the house was sick," Joanna completed, not with ghosts or hauntings as they whispered, but with unprocessed grief, with pain locked behind walls. "The babies cried because they felt it. Children are sensitive to energies, to emotions that adults try to hide." Raphael stood up, unable to remain seated. He walked to the window, observing the garden they had recovered together, The hydrangeas, Beatrice's favorite flowers, were beginning to display their blue buds all around the perimeter. "Why now?" he asked without turning around. "Why reveal the truth just when everything was starting to settle?" Joanna approached, stopping a few steps from him. "Because your journey is almost complete, Dr. Aldridge. You have crossed the darkest valley of grief and found a way back to the light. Your children are safe in your love. The house breathes again." There was something in the way she spoke, a tone of farewell that made Raphael turn abruptly. "You're leaving," it wasn't a question, but a painful realization. Joanna smiled, that serene smile that carried so many meanings. "I promised Beatrice I would take care of you until you were ready to go on alone. That moment has come. But what about the boys? They've grown so attached to you, and they will remember me through you. Through the stories you will tell about the cousin who came to help when they needed it most." She extended her hand, lightly touching his arm. "Just as they will remember Beatrice through your love, and through the memories you now openly share." Raphael felt a wave of contradictory emotions, gratitude for what Joanna had done, sadness for her imminent departure, a strange feeling that he was, in some way, losing Beatrice again. "Where will you go?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "Back to Charleston, South Carolina, at least for a while," she replied. "I have my own path to follow, my own life to build." A sudden thought occurred to Raphael, an idea so obvious that he was surprised he hadn't considered it before. "You could stay," he suggested with an intensity that surprised him. "Not as a nanny, but as family. The boys need that connection to Beatrice, to her past." Joanna gently shook her head. "Now is not the time. You need to learn to walk alone, to build your own memories. But I promise I won't disappear forever. I'll be the distant cousin who visits on birthdays, who sends presents at Christmas, who will be there for important moments." Raphael nodded, understanding the wisdom behind that decision. Joanna wasn't abandoning them, just giving them space to grow, to find their own rhythm as a family. "When?" he asked, resigned. "At the end of the week," she replied. "Enough time to say a proper goodbye, to teach you the last details of the boys' routine." In the days that followed, something changed in the dynamics of the mansion. It wasn't a sad or painful change, but a natural movement, like a season coming to an end to make way for the next. Raphael carefully observed Joanna's every gesture with the babies, absorbing knowledge, memorizing techniques. Together they organized the boys' room, placing photographs of Beatrice in small frames, selecting her clothes that would be kept as mementos for when they were older. On the last night before her departure, when the babies were already asleep, they sat on the porch with cups of tea, as they often did. The silence between them was comfortable, full of unspoken meanings. "I'd like to show you something," Raphael said, standing up. "Come with me." He led her to the room that had once been locked, Beatrice's sanctuary that had now transformed into something different. The heavy curtains had been replaced by lighter ones, allowing moonlight to enter the previously dim room. On the bed, still made with Beatrice's favorite comforter, was a carved wooden box. "This is for you," he said, handing the box to Joanna. Upon opening it, she found photographs, dozens of them, showing Beatrice and herself as children, teenagers, young adults, shared moments on beaches, farms, family parties. "Where did you find these?" she asked, her voice choked with emotion. "At the back of her closet," Raphael replied. "There was a box with Charleston memories written on it by hand. I thought you'd like to have some of those memories." Joanna ran her trembling fingers over the photographs, pausing at one showing her and Beatrice, about 10 years old, sitting in a small fishing boat. "Our Uncle Anthony took us fishing that day," she recalled with a nostalgic smile. "Beatrice fell into the water trying to catch a crab, and I jumped in to save her, even though I couldn't swim very well. Uncle Anthony had to rescue both of us." Raphael smiled, imagining the scene. "She never told me that story. There are so many stories she didn't have time to tell." Joanna wiped away a tear. "But now you can tell them to the boys as they grow up." The next morning, the farewell was simple and emotional. Mrs. Carmen prepared a special breakfast with all of Joanna's favorite sweets. The household staff, who had initially been suspicious of that calm stranger, now bid her farewell with genuine hugs and promises to keep in touch. Lucy appeared to witness the moment, bringing a gift for Joanna, a delicate necklace with a silver hydrangea pendant. "To remember the garden you helped revive," she said, hugging her with an affection that would have been unthinkable weeks earlier. Joanna thanked her, visibly moved. But the hardest part was yet to come, saying goodbye to the babies, who were now sitting on a rug in the living room, playing with colourful blocks. She knelt before them, watching them with that gaze that seemed to store every detail, every expression. "Grow strong," she whispered, kissing each one's forehead. "I know that you were loved always." Michael, always more expressive, grabbed a lock of her hair, as if wanting to prevent her from leaving. Milo, the observer, kept his eyes fixed on her with an almost adult intensity. "They'll be fine," Raphael assured her, approaching. "Thanks to you." Joanna stood up, unshed tears glistening in her eyes. "Thanks to your love, Dr. Aldridge, it always was." When the taxi arrived, there was one last embrace, long filled with gratitude, silent promises, a connection that transcended rational explanations. "See you soon," Joanna said as she got into the car. "Not goodbye?" Raphael nodded, holding Michael in his lap while Lucy carried Milo. "See you soon," he replied, with the certainty that this was not really an end, but the beginning of a new chapter. He watched the taxi pull away down the stone path until it disappeared around the bend leading to the main road. A strange feeling washed over him, not of loss or abandonment as he had feared, but of fullness, of a completed cycle. "Shall we go to the garden?" he suggested to Lucy, who agreed with a comprehending smile. In the backyard garden, now lush with colors and life, they sat on the grass with the babies. The late afternoon sun bathed everything in a golden light that reminded him of Beatrice's eyes. "You know what's funny?" Lucy commented, watching Milo play with a fallen leaf. "I have the feeling that Joanna was never really here, as if all of this had been a dream." Raphael smiled, perfectly understanding what his sister meant. There was something ethereal, almost supernatural about Joanna's passage through their lives, like a visit that comes exactly when needed and leaves when its mission is accomplished. "Perhaps some angels don't have wings," he replied thoughtfully. "Perhaps they come as ordinary people, with hands that can soothe babies and revive gardens." Lucy laughed softly. "Since when did you become so poetic?" "Since I rediscovered that life goes on, even after pain," he replied simply. At that moment, as if responding to a silent call, Michael took his first hesitant steps, letting go of his father's hand to walk 3 paces towards a blue butterfly that had landed on a nearby flower. He fell onto the grass, but his expression was one of pure joy, not frustration. "Did you see that?" Lucy exclaimed, amazed. "He walked." Raphael felt his heart expand in a way he had thought impossible a few months ago. "I saw it," he replied, his voice choked, "and I'm sure Beatrice saw it too." That night, when he finally put his children to bed, Raphael realized that something fundamental had changed. The boys' room, once permeated with sadness and absence, now overflowed with happy memories, with presence, with continuity. On the dresser, Beatrice's photo smiled serenely, as if blessing that moment. Raphael touched it lightly with his fingertips, feeling no longer the excruciating pain of loss, but a sweet longing, almost comforting. "Thank you," he whispered to Beatrice, to Joanna, to life which, despite all ruptures, insisted on following its course, on continually renewing itself. As he left the room, he noticed that the babies no longer stared fixedly at the wall as they used to. Their gazes now wandered peacefully around the room, secure at peace. The next morning, a letter arrived in the mail, sent from Charleston, South Carolina, with Joanna's handwriting on the envelope. Inside, there was only a card with a simple message. Sunflowers always turn to the sun, even after the longest night. Trust in the light. It always returns. And along with the card, sunflower seeds in a small paper packet, with instructions to plant them in the garden, next to the hydrangeas. Raphael smiled, keeping the card with Beatrice's letters for the children. He was sure that one day, when the boys were older, he would tell them the story of the woman who came to save the family when everyone thought there was no more hope. He would tell them about the nights of crying that ceased, about the garden that was reborn, about the memories unearthed like precious treasures, about how sometimes we need to lose everything to finally find what truly matters. And who knows, perhaps on some birthday, in some future Christmas, Joanna would reappear, no longer as a savior but as family, as a living link to a past that no longer hurt to remember. Meanwhile, there were 2 little boys to raise, a garden to tend, a whole life ahead. And for the first time since Beatrice's passing, Raphael felt ready for this journey. No longer alone, even in solitude. No longer lost, even without a map. Because he had learned the most valuable of lessons. True love knows no end. It only transforms like the seasons, like gardens, like life itself. And so, in a mansion once haunted by silence, now echoed children's laughter and long-forgotten songs. The walls, once cold, now held warmth and memories. The corridors, once empty, now witnessed small, hesitant steps that day after day became firmer, more confident. The pain had not disappeared completely. It never would. But now it shared space with joy, with hope, with the certainty that even on the darkest nights the stars continue to shine. One just needed the courage to look up. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope Raphael and Joanna's story has touched your hearts. To continue experiencing emotions like this, we have a special playlist with other incredible stories that speak of new beginnings, healing, and hope. Find it by clicking here. If this garden of emotions touched you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave your like. Every day we plant unique stories that, like Beatrice's hydrangeas, blossom in different colors for each person who hears them. And you, have you ever had an angel without wings in your life? Tell us in the comments. Until the next story.